For over 1,000 years, Western civilization has been stuck in a dark age of sexual repression and misinformation. We get an oversexed overload from the media, but nothing in the way of honest, helpful, practical information on sex and how to do it right. That sucks, and I'm fucking sick of it. My name's JV Altheras, and I've spent a couple decades learning everything I can about how to have amazing sex and more of it. Not in a classroom like a lot of people who talk about sex. I learned it all in the gutter, right where Mom told me I'd end up. It's my mission to bring an end to the sexual dark age with brutally honest talk and education on all aspects of sex and sexuality, in an atmosphere that will keep you entertained without treating you like an idiot. Shara and I are not doctors. Certifiable, perhaps, but not certified in any way. And that means we don't have to talk about vaginas and penises to maintain academic credibility. You got a problem with a vagina? Call a gynecologist. You want to learn more about pussies and cocks and how to make them happy? You've come to the right place. Greetings and welcome to episode 72.
Hi.
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 What are you being coy about? Like you're bashful?
Oh, I'm not bashful.
Okay.
Well, I used to be. I don't think I am anymore. I think it's from hanging around you.
Yeah,
too
it probably
much.
has something to do with it.
You think so?
Yes.
I never have to worry about talking.
So it's been a few weeks since our last episode.
Yes, it has.
But we have committed to doing at least one episode a month, and we are doing one episode a month.
Yay,
bare
us.
minimum. So we actually have a few more that should be coming up fairly quickly. Shara and I just got back a few weeks ago from yet another awesome trip to Desire Resort.
Woohoo!
As right around the middle of the episode, you will hear our shameless plug for our Desire trip, going along with the Swing Set folks this coming November.
Well, while you call it shameless, I have to say, when you talk about relationships and the day-to-day things, going to Desire is like you're in paradise, and the things that it does for your brain, both being there and then when you come back home.
Yeah.
I mean, we seem to just be in such a better place when
That's
we come
true.
back. And I started thinking about that a little bit, that I'm anxious to talk to two guests that we're going to have on our show to discuss their trip when we went in April.
Yes, we spent quite a bit of time hanging out with Ginger and Prof.
Yes, what a great time.
Yep,
Great people.
That was a lot of fun, and they're going to be on an episode coming up in the very near future to talk about the difference between going in April versus going with the big Swing Set group. Spoiler alert: there may be a regularly scheduled April trip.
I have to say
about that.
They're both great for different reasons.
Yes.
I love being around.
Oh yeah, it was a different atmosphere. It was interesting because we had never experienced Desire, outside of the Swing Set.
Right.
So it was definitely a different atmosphere. It was still great. I mean, we still made friends very quickly and had a good time hanging out. It was just a very different atmosphere.
Different. And, we never, while we had spoken with Ginger and Cooper and all of them prior to going to Desire, we've never actually met them. And so meeting all of those people was great in November. And then, of course, spending more time with Ginger and the Prof in April was awesome. But it, like you said, it's different, but both equally great for different reasons. Missing the people that we met in November, missed them terribly. But also it was just nice to meet some other people as well. But it was just all around. It's a getaway that, if you can only afford it one time a year, and even that one time a year, if you go like, how can I explain doing this trip? It's worth it. It's so worth it because you come back in such a different headspace. And it's not just about, like swinging or, playing with other couples. It's whether you do or you don't.
There were a lot of monogamous couples down there this time.
Yes, a
More
lot.
so than with the Swing Set trip.
Correct. Certainly. But the thing is, it's about getting away and finding that passion for each other that even if you have it at home, it's amazing when you're away from it all, the difference. And we have a hard time being in connection with our business and with other things because the connection isn't the best.
You often have to suppress your inner slut.
Yes. But it's great.
Oh, and here I am without the xylophone prepared.
Don't make me lose train of thought, master.
B for blush.
So anyway, but just the kind of being forced to get away from it all for us because we didn't have the connection, a great connection to home and the business. And it was actually better for us that way. I mean, really,
Yeah.
you just need that break away from it all. And so, shameless plug there, but it's,
Yeah,
I can't stress it enough.
Well, since we are going to spend another entire episode talking about this when we get Ginger and Prof on the show.
I'll try to behave myself.
And we already have kind of a supersized episode here. I do want to get right into it for today.
Okay, let's get into it.
So we are talking about a topic today that is completely unfunny.
Yes.
Which is sexual assault.
Yes.
We had a listener send us a question that we're going to read in a moment, and then we were fortunate enough to have 2 sexual assault survivors who are also activists and educators in their own personal ways, who were willing to come on the show and talk to us at length about the psychological ramifications of their experiences and some of the challenges that they face trying to recover from it. So we have this is a great, very informative episode. Many thanks to our guests.
Yes.
And but we're going to read this question from our listener, and we're going to talk about it just a little bit before we go into the interviews.
Well, we aren't going to read it. You're going to read it.
Okay, fair enough. You've been hanging around with me.
I know.
That's another conversation for that'll work well with Ginger and Prof as well, because you're not participating in the hot tub sci-fi conversations. So our listener is a woman who writes, I don't really know how to phrase this, so I hope you'll bear with my bluntness. I was raped about 3 years ago. I'm still working on dealing with all the shit that comes with that, and I began listening to your podcast with the hope that maybe I'd be able to regain a healthier view on sex and sexuality. I love listening to it so far, but I was kind of wondering, or maybe hoping, that you might have some advice or words of wisdom to people like me in my unique circumstance. I know you probably are lacking in experience with people like me, but you have encouraged your listeners to ask for advice, and this is one place that I have to stop pretending I don't need help. Maybe you could spend a little time on it on a podcast, or respond to this with any resources you might have. Thanks for taking the time to read this request. So, the absolute first thing that I want to say is that this letter typifies what a lot of sexual assault victims feel very incorrectly, which is that they are alone, or somehow they're, something unusual has happened to them. And unfortunately, sexual assault is a plague in this country.
It is, and the unfortunate part is so many people keep it inside because you feel like this black cloud hanging over you. Like, if I tell other people, will they even want to be around me? How do I deal with it? I'm sad sometimes. So many feelings and so much, not sure where to go, how to feel. And it's kind of like I said, a black cloud that goes over their head. And it's unfortunate because there's so many.
Well, this isn't today. We're talking about recovery, so I don't want to get too far into victim blaming and all the other bullshit that normally goes along with it. But
right.
The way Western society treats rape victims goes a long way towards making them feel alone, because they're in many cases afraid to talk about it.
And that's why I'm so proud of this listener writing to us, because if we're one stepping stone to ending that, I'm very grateful, because there should be no one out there letting it hang over their head. It should be discussed. They should not feel guilty. I am a victim. Help me. That is what needs to be done.
Right. And even though everyone may not know it, everyone knows rape victims. Mm-hmm. Everyone knows child sexual abuse victims.
Yes.
You may not know them on a level that they feel comfortable talking to you about it, but and the statistics on this are difficult. For females, depending on the source and depending on how much you want to rely on the source, somewhere between 1 in 6 and 1 in 3 women in America will be sexually assaulted at some time during her life.
Do you know the statistics on men?
Well, the statistics on men are that there are no good statistics.
Okay.
Seriously. Men, especially in our society, are taught to feel that if they get sexually assaulted, they should have been strong enough to protect themselves.
Right.
So it is a different experience for men than it is for women, because of the way we are brought up in our heteronormative society.
So basically, though, what you're saying there is even men have an even bigger black cloud, because they're like, people look at them like, well, why didn't you protect yourself? You're a guy.
Right, exactly.
So it's even worse for them in some ways.
If there's, men are often sexually assaulted by other men.
Right.
And So if they report it or if they try to have them prosecuted, then we then have the homophobia that comes in, because if you've been sexually assaulted by a man, what does that make you gay?
Yes.
As if being gay is a bad thing, but
Right.
it's all just this big ball of negative energy. It's some of the worst of our society.
Right.
Comes out in the way we treat sexual assault victims.
Right.
And then there are a lot of men who are sexually assaulted by women. And that is something that is underreported, vastly underreported. One, in that case, men, especially if you're supposed to be able to protect yourself, you should be a big, strong man enough to protect yourself from a girl, right? But we know that a boner is not something that you always have control over.
Right.
And you can certainly... and we can talk about this on another episode because I don't want to go too far into this, but I have been sexually assaulted by a woman. And it was not psychologically, it was not as bad for me as it certainly is for a lot of victims, but I still had to deal with a lot of the shit that comes afterwards,
Right, because you were dating her at one point.
At one point, yeah.
Not when this happened to you, but...
Right, it was somebody I had formerly dated who broke into my house while I was drunk, climbed into bed with me, got me hard, and started fucking me while I was passed out drunk.
Did she know you were drunk? Or had she seen you?
Oh, she knew I was drunk.
Oh, so you were at the same place, basically.
Yeah, I had run into her.
Okay.
And
made you go get drunk. No, just kidding.
Well, that was a part of it, but that's a story for another time. But I did have to deal with. Of course, there was no condom involved, and she wasn't exactly choosy. So, she was always trying to get me to fuck her without a condom, and I wouldn't. So then I had to stop playing with other people. This was when it took up to 6 months to detect HIV. Mm-hmm. So, I had to deal with a lot of the negative effects. I did not psychologically feel violated in the way a lot of victims feel because of the overall situation. Right,
because you had fucked her and...
Yeah.
This was like an old girlfriend coming back to have some more of your meat and, enjoy you. And you just didn't want any part of that. But still, it was taking advantage of you.
Yeah, she was batshit fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the craziest person... I think the craziest person I've ever known in my life. But, so fact remains that, so I can speak to some of that, but many times in this country, I'm sure in the world, but we speak for America because we're in America. Many times when men, I read an article about researchers into male sexual assault or male sexual assault victims. And one of the things that they said was that very frequently, if they ask a man if he's ever been sexually assaulted, they'll say no. But if they rephrase the question, have you ever been forced to penetrate a woman against your will? They get a lot of yeses. So for men, we're not conditioned to think of that as us being sexually assaulted.
Right.
So, but that's, male sexual assault victims are worthy of their own show, and I don't want to delve too far into that today.
But I do, again, want to thank our listener for coming forward, being someone that's coming forward, whether you're giving your name out or you're using a different name or whatever, the point is that you're taking the strength to come forward to seek help and information. And hopefully, I personally think you will, but I hope you get something from our guest today. I know that I did. So I, again, want to thank you for coming forward and bringing this to our show.
Yes, an important topic. And
very.
I'll reiterate one more time. I'm not lacking in experience with people like you because I know lots of people who are sexual assault victims. I have dated them. I know and have known many people, and so have you, even though you may not realize it. But if there's one thing we can help you with, it's to tell you that you are not alone.
Right.
So without further ado, let's get to our first interview guest. Joining us now to help us with this listener question is Dawn Sarah, who is a sex and intimacy coach and the co-host of the Sex Gets Real podcast. She also brings some personal experience to this topic as a survivor of rape and sexual assault. Dawn, thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. This is a really important topic to me personally, so I'm happy you invited me on to weigh in.
Well, we really appreciate you bringing the benefit of your experience, and it's great to have someone who is a fellow sex educator.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. Sex and consent and elevating the conversation and giving people space for their stories and questions. That's something very near and dear to my heart.
And did this all happen after your experience? You said that you had personal rape experience.
Yeah.
Is this one of the ways that you were able to find a release?
Well, my story, I think all of us have really interesting stories, and often, our own stories and what we find to be our truths are very contradictory. And for me, I was raised in a household that was actually very open about sex. I started learning about sex when I was a toddler, was something we always talked about very openly. So from a very young age, I was kind of the source of advice for my friends because I had information that they weren't getting. So talking about sex is something that I've always done. It's something I've always been interested in. I've always worked with it in some way or another, either as a hobby and now as a business owner. But then personally, I've also struggled with self-confidence, with healthy relationships, and kind of learning to love myself and, feeling comfortable in my own body and my own skin and learning how to use my voice to ask for what I want. And I think part of that struggle came with when I was 14 years old, I was sexually assaulted the first time. When I was 15 years old, I was sexually assaulted a second time by somebody else. And then about a little over a year ago, I experienced 2 rapes that were only about a month apart.
Oh my gosh.
And, I think the early sexual assaults kind of started a dialogue for me where intellectually I understood a great deal about sex. I didn't have any shame about talking about sex, and I was really able to receive other people's stories with a lot of compassion, but I didn't have a lot of trust or compassion for myself. Following the sexual assaults, because a lot of what happened was I internalized it as something I had done wrong. And I think that story continued for me for a long time. And it wasn't until the second rape that I had last year that I finally found my rage. And it was a really interesting thing that happened when I found it. I all of a sudden started realizing I have a voice and I can take my power back and I need to forgive myself and I can trust myself. And I started doing some really serious, heavy work and a lot of learning and a lot of reaching out to others and creating community. And it was wonderfully transformative.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a lot to happen to one person. And I think one of the biggest issues is people with their lack of self-confidence or feeling that they were to blame for, being assaulted or raped.
Yeah.
I'm sure, I've not experienced it myself, but everyone that I've talked to, that seems to be one of the largest issues. I've never had anyone tell me it wasn't an issue for them,
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of different things. So specifically when it comes to sexual assault and rape, part of the reason that I really struggled for a long time was, for me personally, sexual assault and rape was this very violent thing, the way you see it in the movies. So if I wasn't being held at gunpoint and held down and, kicking and screaming, then I must not have been raped. And it wasn't later, and the same with the sexual assault, it wasn't later until I started realizing that, the interesting thing about consent, when you really start to become somebody who is an advocate for consent, the presence of a yes is consent, and it's informed, it's voluntary, it's ongoing, all those things. And, my rapes weren't violent, they weren't particularly aggressive, they weren't, those kind of really, really scary, things that you see in the news that do happen to people. My rapes were much more subtle and almost a little bit more malicious in a way, in that they were planned, they were coercive, they were manipulative, and in the moment with one of them, I didn't realize that it was even happening to me. I just knew that I really didn't like what was happening, but I wasn't being threatened or anything like that, and so it caused a lot of self-doubt of, maybe it was my fault. Maybe I should have fought back, all these kinds of things. And so it's a very insidious process of having to kind of break that down. So I think, part of what your listeners probably dealing with is, there's lots of different types of violations that can happen, and we all respond to them very differently. And regardless of what the violation is, the feelings that you have afterwards are important. And I think sometimes we try to downplay those feelings because we're trying to heal fast and we're trying to move past it and we're trying to pretend like nothing really bad happened, or, like we're some super strong hero that's already past it. And so we deal with it in all these different ways, but we don't really give ourselves time to actually, trust, to relearn how to trust ourselves and to kind of find our power again in our voice and realize, part of what rape and sexual assault is all about is somebody has taken your voice away from you and you felt like you didn't have a choice in whatever reason or how that happened. So it's realizing, you do have choices and you do have power and you do have value, and, then finding a way to trust yourself. I think that's part of the struggle for so many people.
Do you have some suggestions for our listener, how, I'm not, everybody has to deal with it in a different way, but, maybe some ways that you dealt with it might be helpful.
Yeah.
Or, any suggestions you might have.
Yeah, I think, part of the struggle sometimes with taking listener questions, and I find this on my podcast too, is we have such a tiny portion of a much larger story. Mm-hmm. And so for your listener, it kind of depends on how she likes to process things. If she's an introvert versus an extrovert, the way to heal might be a little bit different. So if she's an introvert, doing a lot of reading and connecting with online communities and, working with herself might be really empowering. If she's an extrovert and she wants to, connect with communities and finding groups of survivors and finding groups of really empowered, I'm assuming that she's a woman, so, finding survivor women that she can connect with and, hearing their stories and how they've overcome, those are all different. For me, it happened a couple of different ways. I started connecting with communities that were religious about consent and connecting with people who were sex educators and who were just completely unbending about the power and the beauty and the sexiness of consent at all times helped to restore my faith a little bit. So there are people out there who aren't going to take advantage, who aren't going to manipulate, and it taught me how to have different conversations when it came to sex. It was easier for me to start to recognize red flags much earlier. When you start talking about consent and from a very empowered place, predators, I think, become very apparent very quickly because they don't like the consent conversation.
Right.
So, I connected with communities that were making me kind of feel like, okay, there are good people out there. There's people that I can trust. And then I also started connecting with other survivors in some online communities on Facebook, some super radical social justice-y, misogyny fighting, kind of like femme groups, and getting support there and seeing, one, I'm not alone. There's lots of other people in these groups who have been or even just recently going through, sexual assault and rape, and just being there for each other and allowing us the space to have our stories, without judgment, without trying to fix it, without, the victim blaming. And often people mean well, but when you tell friends sometimes about these things and they start asking questions like, did you go to the police? Why didn't you go to the police? Why didn't you do this? And it becomes more about justifying your action or your inaction and defending yourself rather than just being allowed to have your story. So finding the community, it was really healing for me because I could witness other people's stories and provide support and receive support. And sometimes receiving support is really difficult, especially if you're someone, who sees yourself as very strong and independent. So receiving that support was really good. And then just doing a lot of reading and, what was actually really interesting for me is I've, I had a therapist for many years who I loved. I was working with her for some anxiety issues I was working through, and when the second rape happened and I went into the office and I told her about it, she got really angry with me and almost blamed me. And that kicked me into warrior mode. Like, oh, no, you aren't. And here's why. And it forced me in this, like, moment of rage to, like, step into myself and stand up for myself. And she ended up apologizing, and we ended up ending our relationship because it became clear she was just so invested in me as a person she couldn't stay kind of subjective anymore, objective anymore. And but that moment of me stepping into myself and getting really angry, I got power back with that anger, and that felt really good. So I think that's one of the other things, like, I advise to sexual assault and rape survivors is you are allowed to feel all these feelings. And oftentimes, because we're just trying to put ourselves back together, we start not processing a lot because it just seems like there's so much. So, you know, therapy can be a really wonderful thing, and support groups can too, but giving yourself that space to, like, get really friggin' angry and be, you know, scared for humanity and all those things. All those feelings are really important, and processing them, but then finding a place of hope for yourself, you know, and that I think is where the healing starts happening, is when you start creating space and allowing yourself to hope. And then you start seeing beauty in things again, and you start finding people that you can trust and those kinds of things.
Now, so do you find that you had any issues with consensual sex after your rapes?
I will say that it made me hyper aware, and it made me a little bit more wary and a little bit more cautious. I take a little bit more time now because I understand my process a little bit more. Because I started at a young age with some sexual assaults, what I didn't realize going into last year I had this huge sexual awakening coming out of a long-term relationship, and I jumped into the, like, hookup culture. And I met some really amazing people. I fell in love. I did all kinds of really amazing things. But what I didn't realize was that I had some triggers that I was dancing around on. And when the first rape happened last December, I started to realize there was something in me that was broken. And my therapist and I started working through that, and what made the second rape really frustrating for me was I personally was starting to do all of this work on my sexual assault and my healing, recognizing my triggers. And personally for me, what my trigger is because those two sexual assaults I had as a teenager were someone very gently ignoring my no, and pushing and pushing and pushing until I was silent, and then taking what they wanted. It became, when someone does that to me now, I shut down, and I freeze, and I disassociate, and I'm no longer able to use words. I'm no longer able to move. I just completely check out. So with the first rape that happened last year, I got into a situation where I was saying no over and over and over and over again, and he was slowly wearing me down until I completely disassociated, and then he did things to me that I didn't want, but I wasn't able to communicate consent. I wasn't able to communicate anything. So my therapist and I were working through that, and I met somebody who was really wonderful, who said that he was consent positive. I talked to him for a long time about my triggers, all the things that I was working through, and we finally, after a lot of time, I really took my time, and we decided to have sex. He used all the information I had given him and triggered me and took what he wanted anyway.
Oh, that's disgusting.
Exactly.
It is, yeah.
Right. So that's where the rage started to happen, because I was like, in that moment I finally realized, like, this is really fucked up. There is no gray area on this. This is someone who like manipulated me in a sick way. And, that is where the turning point happened for me. And that's when I started being very clear about boundaries and realizing I deserve to be with people who, when I set a boundary, don't toe it, they don't test it, they don't question it, they accept it and respect it and leave it alone. And so having sex again, I now am very protective of myself. I trust my instincts. They're almost always right. And I've found that anytime I end up in a bad situation, it's because I question my instincts, or I try to give someone a little, second chance without paying attention to those red flags. So learning to really trust my inherent wisdom. And then, being willing to say, here's what I'm okay with. And the second someone is not okay with that, this is not someone I'm willing to spend time with because they're dangerous to me. So I think that's one of the things that I would also recommend to your listener is get really clear on what your boundaries are. And it doesn't matter how ridiculous they might seem to somebody. If your boundary is, I'm not taking my bra off till we've been together for 6 months, and you can't say these 3 words, and other than that, we're going to have amazing sex. Those are your boundaries. So put them out there, be really firm about them. And if anybody starts to try to manipulate you around your boundaries, you got to walk away and say, I deserve better than this.
So you mentioned you mentioned triggers, and I think that's, one of the most important things I think you said was about giving yourself permission to have whatever feelings you're having.
Yep.
And I think that in Western sexuality, our own feelings, we are taught from a young age that we are supposed to suppress our feelings, whatever they are.
Yeah.
Because they're dirty, and if they're not about making babies, then we're not supposed to be feeling them at all.
Yep.
And then the issue of triggers, we have been discussing a lot with people recently. Someone that we were in Desire with, this was a conversation about kink. She has a trigger that is related to being in the presence of the infliction of any kind of pain. And they love the fetish culture. They love costume. There's so much they enjoy about the kink community, but that is a hard line for her. So they have difficulty finding gatherings to go to. It has to be gatherings where the dungeon is somewhere separate. So we've become very conscious of the concept of triggers recently because of the conversations that we've been having. Was there any kind of an aha moment for you in identifying your own triggers? Is there anything you can share about the process of figuring out what those triggers are?
Well, I'll say for me, I had a number of lovers last year, and some really wonderful experiences and some really funny experiences, and a couple not so great ones. And I started noticing that it was not a conscious knowing at first, but it was this really strange feeling that if I was with somebody and they pushed against something that I said I didn't want to do, if they asked really nicely and I felt like they were genuine, I would allow that boundary to be nudged. And it was partially trying to be nice, and partially because I didn't value myself enough to feel like, no, my boundary is important. It was a fear of, well, if I really stick to this boundary, this person's not going to like me and they're going to leave. And it was a very slow awakening for me to start kind of seeing I'm not valuing myself enough. And if this person leaves because I make a firm boundary, then good riddance. I'll find somebody else who loves that boundary. But when it really became crystal clear for me was after that rape in December and working with my therapist. And we just kind of started breaking down the sequence of events and at what point there was a very clear moment in the evening where we were 2 adults having a good time. We had pre-negotiated what the activities were going to be. So I was feeling very good about, nothing's going to happen that I'm not okay with. And then there was a moment when he started coercing me, and I was saying no and, being nice about it. And the coercion kept going, and it started to get manipulative. And I suddenly didn't feel like a consenting adult anymore. I felt like a scared kid. And at that point, I checked out. And so my therapist and I really started kind of unpacking what were the things that led up to that moment so that I can start avoiding those, chain of events. So working with a therapist was really important. And even though our relationship, ended somewhat dramatically, I really, really firmly believe in the importance of therapy or counseling or working with somebody who is, skilled in these things, who has experience in these things, and just helping you to identify, what are the sequence of events that lead up to your triggers. They might not be super obvious until you do a little bit of unpacking or a little bit of digging. And there are times, I do kink, and I have lots of friends in the kink community and my lovers in the kink community. And sometimes, and kinky people will tell you this, sometimes you feel like you have no triggers around something and you're, an hour and a half into a scene and something happens and all of a sudden you are triggered and you have no idea where it came from. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you don't know when a trigger is going to hit. You can't feel it coming on. It happens and you just have to deal with it. And that's part of the importance to me of having people that you're playing with that are high caliber, and I'm like all about pickup play. I'm all about hookups. I'm all about whatever people want to do where they feel empowered. But I feel like no matter what you're doing, you need to make sure that the caliber of the person that you're playing with is very high so that if you get triggered, or if you start to have a flashback, or if you just suddenly aren't feeling it anymore, that person is adult enough and confident enough and respectful enough that they can say, okay, something's going wrong. How do we deal with this?
I agree.
So I think that's going to be really important for your listener is, she might have to change how she's approaching sex a little bit. But, if she wants relationships, and even if she doesn't want relationships and she just wants sex, learning how to find high quality partners and lovers is going to be really important, I think, for her, because there are people out there who really respect boundaries. They really respect consent. They can make consent really sexy and playful, but they're hard to come by. You got to really know the right questions to ask. But I've found them. I've had a partner now that is a sex educator, and he's really consent aware, and he's helped me work through a lot of things. We've purposely done work on the areas where I struggle and my boundaries and using my voice when I get triggered, and it's been a wonderful healing process that's allowed me to really, see the value in myself and what I bring to the table. But, it wasn't an overnight process, but it's definitely possible. It's just a matter of finding people who understand the importance of respect. And as weird as it might sound, or as sad as it might sound, finding someone who respects their partners is not that easy.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're a little spoiled being in the kink community because consent is literally ritualized.
Yeah.
And we tend to be so hyper aware of it. If we negotiate a scene that is flogging, you have not consented to be paddled.
Right.
So the conversation needs to include, okay, how about other toys? And it's something we tend to be so hyper aware of that we get, I don't know, we get a little bit myopic sometimes. It's easy to stop seeing that the whole world doesn't look at consent that way.
Well, even in the kink community, though, prior to me, getting together with you, I met quite a few who did not respect.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. There are bad players. There are bad players everywhere.
We've discussed.
You always do have to be careful.
Mm-hmm. I've had some experiences that I definitely, was very fortunate not to get raped or assaulted, but they definitely were manipulative.
Yep.
And it could have easily gone the other way. But I've always been kind of I don't know. in some ways I'm shy and quiet, but when it comes to protecting myself, I have no trouble standing up and saying something. But that's because I grew up with somebody that I had to feel that I had to protect myself from.
Yeah.
So I learned it at an early age.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, for me, consent is a conversation that doesn't happen enough outside the kink community. In fact, a lot of people, when you bring up consent, don't even really know what that means. If they're,
I agree.
Really vanilla. They don't, understand no means no, and yes is consent, and a maybe is not a yes. And, it needs to be ongoing, and it needs to be voluntary, and it needs to be, enthusiastic, something that someone's freely giving and enjoying until they're not, and then when they're not, that's it. And on the other side, it's a conversation that constantly happens in kink communities. But, the rape that I had, the second one, was with somebody who's very prominent in the kink community. And so he really knew his way around those conversations. And looking back, I see where, had I been in a place where I really valued my boundaries and I felt like I could use my voice, I would have seen red flags. But not valuing myself and really enjoying the relationship that we were building, and then getting triggered kind of on purpose, unfortunately, it just, I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but, it's so important for everybody, all of your listeners, to really realize that no matter who you are, having boundaries is a critical part of having a really healthy, fun, consensual, sexual life. And you need to know what your boundaries are, and they shift and they change. And that's, one of the things that I talk to my clients about a lot, especially ones in relationships, is, no to something tonight doesn't mean no to something forever. Just like yes to something tonight does not mean I want to do this all the time. And the needs that I have today aren't going to be the same needs that I have in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So, getting really clear on your needs and wants and being a really clear communicator is critical to having really healthy sexual relationships.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Don. I think we're running short of time, so it's about time to wrap up. Do you have any final thoughts for the audience?
No, all I'll just say to your listener is you are really not alone. And dealing with your shit, as you put it, it's going to happen. It's not going to be linear. It's going to have ebbs and flows. You're probably going to have huge leaps forward. You might take a few steps back. Give yourself permission to have whatever your process is, and then be patient with yourself. I know it was 3 years ago, but healing happens at all different speeds. So allow yourself to heal at whatever speed you need to. Don't rush it. And you'll find yourself, hold on. You'll find yourself where you want to be when it's ready.
Well, thank you so much, and we really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing the benefit of your experience, and your unfortunately rather lengthy experience trying to recover from various types of sexual assault. And it's a little bit inspiring to hear you in such a good place about it. So we really appreciate you coming on the show.
Right, to be out there and help other people, and you obviously are doing a lot of that, is a wonderful thing. After going through everything that you went through, some people would say, I'm going to stay inside the house, never step outside again. So you give a lot of listeners out there a lot of hope. So it was great to hear your story, and thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It was really wonderful to just be able to share my story and kind of put it out there, because I don't think it's something that we talk about enough, just the healing process. So this was a really great opportunity. So thank you so much to you and all your listeners.
And we'll be right back after this. If you've listened to episode 63 or 65, you already know what an amazing time Shara and I had at Desire Resort and Spa in Cancun last November.
In fact, we can't wait to go back this November, and we're taking you with us.
We managed to snag a block of rooms just for our listeners, so grab your playmate and come spoil yourselves with a week of clothing-optional, couples-only paradise surrounded by sexy, amazing people.
We'll be sharing the resort with the Life on the Swing Set crowd, so we can promise you that whether you decide to play well with others or just have a perfect week with your partner, it will be a week you'll never forget.
The trip is November 7th to 14th, and for more details, just check out sexualdarkage.com and follow the Desire Trip 2015 link at the top of every page, or contact Shar Travel at 215-321-4451 and tell them you want to do Desire with JV and Shara. It only takes one night's room fees to lock in your reservation, and these rooms go fast, so don't wait. If you only take one vacation in 2015, you should come do Desire with us. When we were researching budget bondage gear at a listener's request, we stumbled onto extremerestraints.com and found the most impressive bondage gear site on the internet. And we don't say that lightly.
We bought a bunch of toys to try them out, and we're so impressed with the selection, quality, and service that we reached out to them about sponsoring the show.
From basic whips to top-notch floggers, from beginner cuffs to shackles and cages, from nipple clamps to fucking machines, from budget to bad fucking ass. ExtremeRestraints.com has put together an immense catalog of kinky gear that we honestly believe is second to none on the internet.
And not only do they offer a free gift and 99-cent toys for new customers, plain brown wrapper shipping, and free shipping on orders over $119, they'll give you 10% off if you enter the promo code ESDA at checkout.
And that's not 10% off on your first order. It's 10% off every order, forever, as long as you enter the code. Because they're awesome and they support this show. You can listen to episode 70 for more details, or just check out extremerestraints.com, use the promo code ESDA, and get your kink on. Joining us now is Megan Allen, a sex educator friendly to all types of adult sexuality and owner of the Facebook sex education page The Downstairs. She also works at Forbidden Fruit Toys in Austin, Texas, and is a survivor of sexual abuse and also a victim's advocate. Megan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
So we read the letter from our listener, and Shara and I come at this from a few different directions, but we'd like to hear your first gut reaction to her questions.
Well, thinking about what it's like being a survivor, everybody deals with that differently, and it seems like this person sort of resisted sexuality and sex positivity because it hit a sore spot. And looking for more resources and non-traditional resources for sexuality, I think, is a really good step towards self-healing. And if anything is a good resource, I think it would be this page because it has such diverse information on it. So the question's very welcome, and I think that they have the right idea.
So, as a survivor of sexual abuse, what have been some of the challenges that you found as a result of your experiences, and how did you overcome them?
So, I believe I acted similarly that this woman did, that I sort of resisted certain types of sexuality. I actually have vaginismus, which is a muscle issue that's normally linked to sexual abuse, and sometimes women get it after they have a child or a miscarriage or something like that, where they can't control the PC muscles down there that expand for penetration. So I have physical issues that have arisen from being sexually abused, and I know a lot of women deal with that. So it made it to where for a very long time I didn't seek out that type of pleasure. I didn't worry about penetration at all, and I feel like it hindered my development a little bit sexually growing up, because I was sexually abused when I was a child, and then working through that later when you're a teenager with your adolescent sexuality. And as an adult, it was painful for me physically. And emotionally, I didn't really remember much, but the lack of information, even coming from someone doing STD counseling in college, I didn't know what was wrong for a long time. And I believe if we talk a little bit more about it and tell women about Kegel exercises and vaginal dilators and things like that, that other people with those physical symptoms can work through it emotionally and physically and have the kind of sex life they want. And I am a big member of the kink community. We focus on a lot is about how sexuality doesn't always have to do with penetration. And we have a huge community around consent. So everything that I do, I consent to and talk about with my partner beforehand.
And I find consent is a real big stepping stone in so many ways now, that a lot of people in the kink community have always been consent oriented, but outside of the kink community, it seems to be not something that people paid much attention to. You know what I'm saying? It's much more, consent is much more aware to me in the kink community, and it needs to be made more aware in all aspects of people's lives, you know?
Right, because we have all of these fancy checklists, and we talk about things and we negotiate, and it seems very important with something that's more involved, like impact play or fisting, but we need to talk about any type of sexuality before we do it, just to see if we're all on the same page, see where our partner's lines are, preferred things, which will make the experience go better anyway for everyone.
Exactly.
So I think that it's coming out now.
It is. I mean, much more so in a lot of other areas of life other than just kink. So from your aspect of dealing with everything, it happened to you at such a young age, you said. So how long did it take you to get to a place where you are, I mean, like, look at you now, you're out there for other people, you're an advocate for them. How did you get from point A to point B?
Many things, but I would say number one, therapy. Because I wasn't old enough to know about what was really happening. It's sort of formative when people are abused as children. And there were a lot of things that there's no way I could have worked through it without a professional. And though kink can be very therapeutic, and I've worked through a lot of things with that help, it's no placement for therapy. It's not a replacement. So if there's something that's happened to you, if you feel like you struggle with something, no matter what it is, professional help is really the way to go. And the only way that that's going to succeed is if you work on it yourself and think about it. And you can use avenues like kink, and you can talk to your friends and be open with your partners. But at the end of the day, it takes a lot of work to work through these things. And it's totally possible.
And I don't know if you were put into therapy by a family member, or if you took it upon yourself to find a therapist. Did you go the traditional route? And when I say that is, there's all sorts of psychiatric help out there to help people deal with abuse situations, being a victim of rape and things like that. Or did you seek somebody that was perhaps in the lifestyle that really helped, that could relate to you enjoying kink and the kink helping you, and find somebody that is maybe in the lifestyle themselves? Do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah. No, that's a wonderful question. So when I was younger, I was put in therapy, but it was only for a few years. And then when I went to college, I had free therapy through my university. If you're a student, check it out. Most of the time you can at least get a free meeting every semester for something, or it's at an extremely low rate, or it's completely free. So I was lucky enough to have completely free therapists available to me. And one of them was well-versed in cognitive behavioral therapy, the other kind of CBT.
Mm-hmm.
We worked through a little bit of that, and that was very helpful. And I saw someone else just to talk to. And I also worked in that same office, being an advocate and doing STI counseling with peer education, things like that. And then as an adult, I actually went to a community therapy office that offered a sliding scale when I was still coming out of college. You can pick your own therapist. You'll be put with someone. If you go to something like that where there's multiple therapists, they'll pick someone for you. And if it's not quite a good fit, you can change. So I did change once. I had a really great guy but I did change to a woman that's quite conservative, and I was very upfront with her about my lifestyle, and she has a background in sex crime, so she understands some of the things, and we spend a lot of time talking about kink, but she's open to it. I highly recommend looking up the KAP, which is Kink Aware Practitioners. They have doctors, they have lawyers, they have therapists on there. There isn't going to be someone listed for every area in the United States, but in most large cities there are people listed, and if you are one yourself, you can get listed on there. And I highly recommend, if there isn't someone in your area, to just be open and honest with your therapists and doctors, as honest as you feel comfortable doing, because most of the time, if they don't have the experience, they're still open to it.
And I want to say that I completely agree with you, Megan, on that. I worked in the psych field for quite a long time, and I'm one of those people that would help give it to the psychiatrist to help assign it. And not always is it a perfect fit. So don't be afraid to say, no offense, but I don't think we're a good fit. And don't be afraid to try somebody that might not be kink aware, but they might have the experience, like you said, yours had experience in sex crimes. So I think it's very important to tell them everything and be upfront with them, because otherwise it can hinder trying to get you to a place where you're happy and satisfied. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah, if it's not a good fit, switch around. And my therapist is a very conservative woman. She's very religious and spiritual, and I don't really identify that way. I'm non-monogamous, I'm kinky, and I talk about these things. And even though if I weren't open-minded enough, I would have written her off as someone that wasn't very good at her job, and someone that has helped me in the last few years really work through a lot of things. So I highly recommend seeing a therapist if you're at that point. Some people think that working through things and talking about things that happened in the past, and in my case, almost 20 years ago, wouldn't be helpful and might bring up negative feelings. But until we address the things that have happened and learn ways to move past that and survive around that, then we do still need to think about it and address it.
Mm-hmm. And I also think that you were fortunate. You changed therapists once, and sometimes it takes several times. So for our listeners out there, don't be afraid to switch 3 or 4 times if you're not happy.
I got lucky.
Yes, you did, because, they assign you and you switched once and you've had a good fit there ever since. And that is very important. I can't stress that enough, is don't be afraid to ask over and over again until you find somebody that's helpful.
Yeah, and there are no fast solutions in therapy, unfortunately.
No.
If you believe that it's going to be too expensive and you can't afford it, then you won't allow yourself to see the options available, because a lot of places have options.
Right, like you mentioned, the sliding fee scale, and that's what you mentioned when someone's calling in for help. You can find a facility and you can ask for the sliding fee scale, which will go by your ability to pay, will go based on your income. And some of them will accept Medicaid if you're on Medicaid. So don't be afraid to go out there and get the help, because it's out there.
And you have to ask for it. They won't offer it to you.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, I mean, if they did try and offer it to you, it'd be very intrusive. Probably put you off entirely.
Yeah, perhaps, So just when I worked at a center for quite a long time, there were times that we switched people out because it wasn't a right fit for them. So, I just think that you brought that up, and it was such a great point, because so many people go in and they feel like, oh, I didn't get the help. And they might not feel like you do, where they feel strong enough, or wait, this isn't working, no offense. You have to be strong when it comes to that and say, no offense, this just isn't a fit. And, because this is your life. This is you wanting to get better. You can't be afraid to say, this isn't working for me. I need somebody different, because that's what you're paying for.
And if you're uncomfortable talking to that person about it, and that social confrontation's a little bit too much, you don't have to talk to the therapist themselves. You can just call the front office and ask. So if it gets to the point where you don't want to hurt their feelings or anything, but it's just not a good fit, the woman in the front office can tell them. And it happens all the time.
It does. It does. Speaking from experience.
All the time.
Right. All the time. So I would tell people, even when we were doing the assignments, if this doesn't work for you, just let us know and we'll find somebody different for you. So it's very important to be able to do that.
So, Megan, you've managed to transform yourself from a victim into a sex educator and a peddler of adult toys. Do you think that your experiences shaped? Well, obviously, your experiences shaped the person you are now. But do you think that the process of trying to overcome your abuse led you in that direction? To become a sex educator and to work in the adult industry, or is that do you think that's the person you would have always been?
There's a lot of factors that worked into it. Another formative thing happened to me when I was younger. Both my parents were gay, and they wanted a family, so they had me. It didn't work out because they're both gay. And my father ended up contracting HIV/AIDS, and he passed away when I was pretty young. And I knew that he was sick, and I knew that it was something that was taboo. It was marked for gay men, even as a kid, something we knew about in the 90s. And I knew that if there was less shame attached to it, then he could have had better treatment. His life could have been a little bit more fulfilled. And growing up knowing that was very, very formative to me, and that's what put me in the sex ed direction. Once I really figured that out and saw my friends around me making decisions and not communicating, it really opened my eyes to how important that was. And that moved me into finding my own healing solutions for my sexual abuse and my penetration issues, because there were years in middle school, high school, parts of college where that wasn't something that I was really paying attention to. I didn't realize what was going on with my body because we didn't have good education.
Right. How awful for you. I feel bad because, that's, like a time of people's lives that it's already very challenging for some young people, and to be dealing with the extra things going, what's going on here, and trying not to focus too much on it, but yet want to make your life happy. You know what I mean? It's, as you're growing up, you want to enjoy things in life. So.
And teenagers don't have tools. And when I told my best friend that it hurt when I tried to masturbate, when we're kids and you talk about it and you're like, oh, I did this or whatever, they said, oh, well, it only hurts the first few times and then it's fine. And I thought, okay. And it never stopped until I got myself into Planned Parenthood. I talked to people, I got educated, and the information's out there, but without the knowledge that that's a thing, it took years to figure out what that was. So me working at a toy store, I have people that come in and say, it hurts so bad when I do penetration. And I say, you should ask your doctor about vaginismus, because there are two different kinds of pain for the most part from the vagina. There's nerve pain and there's muscle pain. And the muscle pain we can definitely work through. The nerve pain, I don't have the medical degree or the knowledge to tackle that. I know that there are a lot of doctors that spend a lot of time on that. But the muscle pain is very, very common and very easy to work through.
That's good to know, because I think there's probably a lot of people out there that could benefit from hearing your story. Because for me, when I started masturbating, it never hurt. I never, right from the very beginning, it never hurt at all. So it's interesting to hear that part of it, because so many people, so many different things go on and they have nowhere to turn. I mean, that's part of why I think it's so important to have Ending the Sexual Dark Age, is to try to get the word out there that it's okay to ask these questions. It's okay to, get the information that you need. And people like you make that difference. So thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's something that I think is really important. And it can happen to anyone with a vagina once. Just the muscles don't expand for penetration properly. Some women have experience with it if they're stressed out and trying to have intercourse, or something like that. Sometimes it is always like that. Sometimes it's like that after sexual abuse or after a miscarriage. Things like miscarriage and giving birth, after a while, for most people, it gets back to normal after their body gets back after pregnancy. But sometimes it doesn't. And instead of the doctors letting them know that there's something to be done about it, they just think that they're quote unquote broken after that.
Exactly. And no, they're not. And that's why it's so important to get that information out there. And I have a feeling you might end up getting a lot of visitors at your toy store saying help.
It's funny. For Kegel exercises, it's very easy to do, and you don't even really need toys. But it's the same muscle you use when you stop and start your stream as pee in the restroom. So you can do it on the toilet and help strengthen those muscles. So when you have better control of those muscles, you can control whether or not they contract or what have you. You can do the same thing by inserting vibrators or vaginal dilators, which are like glorified vibrators all in a set that go from little to big. And you can insert that and do the same muscle movement, or you can use Benoit balls, which some people really like. They're very, very popular. I think after the whole 50 Shades thing too, because it was in the book, a lot of women are interested in the Benoit ball.
They are, aren't they? It's funny. I mean, how much 50 Shades of Grey, and
Yeah, we saw the awful trailer for what is sure to be an awful movie.
Well, it's a fantasy novel, so Fabio should be on the cover of it. It's all beauty and love and sex and kink and fucking without any of the background of the partner communication or the negotiation. It's a fantasy novel. So I hope that when people are interested in that, they end up finding resources that let them know how to get there.
I'm interested in knowing if they talk about consent in the movie,
It's not in the book very much. There's a few conversations that are kind of negotiation type conversations, but for the most part, it's not included in the books. I did read them.
See, and I think it's important to have that, the consent. I mean, I know it's, like you said, it's fantasy type situation.
Well, yeah, but unfortunately, it's fiction, and it's presented as a work of fiction, so there's only so much burden we can put on the author to be realistic about it. And obviously, every author hopes their book goes big time, but, rarely does it. It's not like you should write everything you write planning on it to sell millions and millions of copies. But in the instances when something that, is, whether it's kink or any other kind of alternative lifestyle, it gets out there in the mainstream consciousness and it becomes what people think the reality is.
Right. That's my concern, is that people go, and I think the kink community has made a big deal about the fact that, consent is important, number one. And I just hate to see fiction, people take fiction and they go, oh, this is what it's really all about. No, it's not. This is fiction, and so that concerns me a little bit, because people who aren't in the kink community, they read it, they might get aroused, they might say, oh, I want to try this out. And it's important that they know all the consent rules, because it's, it's an important thing. And especially with the way that life is going these days, people take advantage of other people. And I hate to see that happen.
Yes, it does pose some more nuanced problem dating and playing with people. But I hope that some of the workshops that we do at our store and some of the other sex educators around the United States I've seen have been really kinking in harder, talking about different kinks and talking about some of the safety that goes behind impact play and bondage, things like that. I do meet a lot of individuals at my store that come in and want to do something, and we tell them the safer way to do it. And hopefully we'll catch some of them before they put a rope around their neck or something.
Exactly. Well, if JV and I ever get to Austin, Texas, we'll be visiting your store. We'll come and see you there.
Oh, it's fine.
Becoming an advocate for those that have been abused or raped, what would be, besides therapy, what would be the next piece of advice that you would give them? Because it seems like you've come a long way from where you were to where you are. So somebody like our listener who wrote into us, wanting to know, what can I do? What would be is there any other suggestions you might have for her?
Yes. One is be patient with yourself, because like you had mentioned before, it does take time to heal. There's going to be things that you want to do that it's not that you can't do it, it's just not the time yet. So if it's difficult to even go on a date, give yourself some time. It's okay. If it's difficult to be intimate with people in certain ways, that's okay. If you're intimate with someone once and it works out okay, and then you go to have that same intimacy again, and it doesn't work out that time, it doesn't mean that it's always going to be that way. You're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days.
I agree with that. And I know we've kept you for a little bit, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. But on that note, can I ask you, how often did you share, before you became intimate with somebody, how often did you share your story? Did you feel that you needed to? Did you feel, no, I don't have to? Did you find it easier for you if you shared it so that people would understand where you were coming from?
I always shared it with my partners, and this is something else we need to talk about when we talk about fit, is you can be completely compatible with somebody, but if they don't have patience with you and they're not understanding of the situation you're in, then it's not a good fit situation. So I've been in relationships with people while I was going through this and getting to my penetration point, and that was something that they needed in their relationship, was vaginal penetration, I guess on command or every time that they had intimacy. And for me, it's something like, we can try it, and some days it would work and some days it wouldn't. So respecting that and saying that this might not be the person I need to be dating because they don't respect that part of me, that I need time with that. And also not feeling like, oh, let me back up here. It's very easy to get discouraged and feel like there's something fundamentally wrong with you after your consent has been violated in that way, when you were touched in a way that wasn't appropriate. It makes you think about your own actions and not wanting to push other people's boundaries unnecessarily. It makes me think about dating more and the language people use, people's understanding of rape culture, and that it exists in our community and that it's normalized, and the fact that many, many people have been sexually abused. So disclosing that to my partners, I've received, "Hey, me too." I know that my sister has, I know my brother has, my mother was, and it became another healing step for me to be able to open up and have those other people meet me with that vulnerability. And for the most part, it's worked out really well. And the times that it didn't, it probably wasn't supposed to anyway.
Good. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah, I think it's we're going to need to wrap it up here shortly, but I wanted to give you, wanted to ask you if you tell the audience a little bit about your Facebook page and a little bit more about Forbidden Fruit, where you work.
I run a sex ed page on Facebook called The Downstairs with a few other sexual health educators that help me post links. And we talk about everything from sex positivity to non-monogamy to trans rights to women's rights to the science behind the new male birth control coming out. None of us are doctors. We're all good friends with resources. And at Forbidden Fruit in Austin, Texas, we've been keeping Austin kinky since 1981. We have kink supplies, all of the newest vibrating toys, and most of it is coming out rechargeable now, so that's neat. And we do workshops and classes. We focus on education. So everything in there is handpicked. We're woman-owned and operated. It's a good place to be.
Yay for woman owned. And also, I said, yay for woman owned. I wanted my own dildo store. I'm still going to work on that.
Baby, you would never sell any. You keep them all for yourself. This is not how you build a business.
Well, back to, I do think that we should take a visit and, check their place out, the toy store out. But the other thing I want to know is the workshops. How, if somebody was interested in attending it, is there do you have that posted somewhere?
Yes. So if you look on Google, just Google Forbidden Fruit Austin, and our website will come right up. You can look at forbiddenfruit.com as well, and it brings you to the main page. You can click through to our online store, which is on the right side. It says store, and under there will be some workshops. You can sign up online. Some of them are $20, some of them are $10, some of them are free. So
great.
Lots of the
Thank you.
BDSM classes coming up are free. And
Oh, awesome.
they're normally Thursday nights or Sunday nights.
Okay.
We've got libations and cookies and the whole thing.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we will find ourselves in the Austin area, but I know we do have some audience down in those parts.
We sure do.
We're fairly big in Texas, fairly big in California, so you happen to be one of our hotspots.
Okay. Well, yeah, come see me. And we also have an online store for anybody that's not in the area.
Oh, I think I might be visiting there. I'm constantly buying toys. Well, we are actually, but so we'll be visiting there, and so we can put the link up there for them too.
Oh yeah, this has been Megan Allen, sex educator and purveyor of adult toys, victims advocate. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your experience and sharing your story with us, Megan. And we know that there are victims everywhere who need, above all else, to understand that they are not alone. So thank you for helping us make our listener feel less alone.
Oh,
And thank you for sharing your story.
it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Of course.
And that wraps up this supersized episode of Ending the Sexual Dark Age. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will be back soon with more talk about being sexy in paradise and sexy people in paradise. And we have another interview episode coming up with an activist who deals with sex worker rights. And we have a good conversation about sexual assault as it specifically relates to sex workers who have their own particular challenges in dealing with assault.
Yes.
So is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience before we wrap it up, baby?
I think I did a lot of talking earlier, so I think I'm good.
Shower's done talking, everybody. Woohoo!
I have other things to do that don't require talking.
Yeah, so please feel free to stop by the website and join the conversation at sexualdarkage.com. Come see us on Facebook or Twitter at JVAltheros on Twitter or at JVS_Shara on Twitter. You can email jvaltheros@gmail.com or jvshara@gmail.com. And of course, you can reach out to us on Facebook with pretty much anything you've got to say.
I want to thank you for my necklace. It was a beautiful gift.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, Shara's got some new jewelry.
I do. Thank you. It was a nice surprise and beautiful. Thank you.
Well, she's been working very hard at being a good slave, and I wanted to commemorate it. I wanted to give her a gift, and we have been talking. This will be something. Seems like everything is worth its own episode. But we wanted to get her something that represented her collar, even when she could not wear her collar.
Yes. So thank you very much.
Got her
beautiful.
a Tree of Life necklace that is kind of reminiscent of my Tree of Life tattoo.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Princess. You earned it. All right, so until next time, this is JV and Shower reminding you that sex is one of the greatest things in life, and there is always room for better.
Always.